My dad gave the farm to my brother and kicked me out because I bought a pair of pigeons. Let me tell you about the American dream. According to some Hollywood fantasy, it involves white picket fences, 2.5 kids, and a golden retriever that doesn't shed on your IKEA furniture. According to my life, it's 2 tractors that break down every other Tuesday, 3 cows that hate my guts, and the distant hope of sleeping past 5 a.m. before I hit 40. Welcome to my slice of paradise in rural Iowa, where I, Tommy Mitchell, age 24, have been living the dream since I was old enough to lift a shovel. And by dream, I mean working my ass off on my family's farm while watching everyone else pursue something called happiness and fulfillment, concepts as foreign to me as a vacation day. You know how some families have a golden child? Well, my family has Kevin, my older brother, the business genius, the chosen one. When we were growing up, Kevin was the one who got the new clothes while I got his hand-me-downs. Kevin was the one who got a car for his 16th birthday while I got more farm chores. And when it came time for college, Kevin got a check for $20,000 to attend business school in Des Moines. What did I get? A pat on the back and the family motto: "The farm will be yours someday, Tommy, if you just keep working hard." 10 years later, I'm still waiting for someday, while working so hard my spine is considering unionizing. Every morning starts the same. The rooster crows at 4:30 a.m., though I swear that bird's internal clock is broken. I drag myself out of the same twin bed I've had since I was 12, pull on my worn Carhartt overalls, and stumble downstairs where Dad, Jim, is already on his second cup of coffee, Bible open on the kitchen table. Mom, Marge, is at the stove, flipping pancakes while humming along to some Christian radio station. They're good folks, my parents. Salt of the earth, as they say. The kind who believe every problem can be solved with prayer, hard work, and a side of passive-aggressive Bible verses about patience being a virtue, to which I always mentally respond, "Sure, and I'm the patron saint of shovels." But I keep that thought to myself while scarfing down breakfast before heading out to milk the cows who, I'm convinced, hold secret meetings to plan how to make my life more difficult each day. The farm itself isn't much to look at. 200 acres of corn and soybeans, a barn that leans slightly to the left like it's had one too many, and machinery that belongs in a museum. Our house is a century-old farmhouse with creaky floors and drafty windows, but on summer evenings when the sun sets over the cornfields and turns everything golden, even I have to admit it's not half bad. Not that I get much time to admire the view. Between fixing fences, maintaining equipment, and handling the daily chores, my days blur together in an endless cycle of work. And the soundtrack? An old radio that only picks up 3 stations: country, religious talk, and more country. I know every Willie Nelson and Johnny Cash song by heart, not by choice but by repetitive exposure. The only relief from monotony comes from my visits to old Sam's barn down the road. Sam Peterson, 78 years old with a Santa Claus beard and hands like leather, was my Grandpa L's best friend back in the day. While everyone else around here focuses on corn yields and cattle prices, Sam's passion has always been racing pigeons. Yes, racing pigeons. Not the dirty birds you see in city parks, but Belgian racing homers, sleek, intelligent birds bred for speed and an uncanny ability to find their way home from hundreds of miles away. Sam still keeps a pair, descendants from my grandpa's champion flock. Grandpa L. Ellis Mitchell was apparently quite the pigeon racing legend in these parts back in the 70s. I never knew him. He died before I was born. But the way Sam tells it, Grandpa's birds won more races than the Chicago Bears won games. There's a yellowed newspaper clipping Sam keeps framed in his barn. Local farmer's pigeon takes $5,000 prize in regional race, 1973. $5,000 in 1973 was serious money, the equivalent of a new truck or several months' profits from a farm. All from a bird that weighed less than a pound. I love flipping through the old photos whenever I visit Sam. There's one of Grandpa standing proudly beside his pigeon loft, holding his champion bird with the same reverence other men might hold their firstborn. Grandpa had this saying that Sam likes to repeat: "Pigeons aren't just birds, Tommy. They're the wings of your soul." When I first heard that, I thought it was just some poetic nonsense from a generation that didn't have Netflix to keep them entertained. But the more time I spend watching Sam's birds circle overhead, returning faithfully to his barn no matter how far they fly, the more I think Grandpa might have been onto something. Sam's barn is my sanctuary. Whenever Kevin calls from Des Moines to brag about his latest business venture, or Mom starts dropping hints about the nice church girl she wants you to meet, I head to Sam's. We sit on rickety lawn chairs outside his barn, watching the pigeons while Sam sips his homemade moonshine, which he insists is performance-enhancing fuel for birds, though I've never seen him actually give any to the pigeons. Thank goodness for that. Those birds already fly like they've had 3 espressos and a Red Bull chaser. Sam has all sorts of stories about the glory days of pigeon racing in Iowa. Back in the 70s, it was like the local Super Bowl, farmers betting more on birds than they did on horses. There were weekly races during the season, with birds being trucked hundreds of miles away before being released to find their way home. The first one back to its loft won, and the purses could be substantial. Sometimes when Sam gets deep into his moonshine and stories, I catch myself wondering if I was born in the wrong era. I can picture myself back then, standing next to Grandpa, releasing birds with names like Lightning and the Mitchell missile into the dawn sky, waiting with anticipation to see which would return first. Instead, I'm stuck with spreadsheets about crop yields and cattle feed costs, and the closest thing to excitement is when our ancient John Deere makes it through planting season without a major breakdown. My dreams smell like manure and diesel fuel, or at least they did, until last Tuesday, when everything changed. I was coming in from the fields, covered in dust and sweat, when I spotted Dad's truck in the driveway. Next to it was a shiny BMW that looked as out of place on our farm as a penguin in the Sahara. Kevin was home, unexpected, unannounced, and as I would soon learn, unsuccessful. I found the family gathered in the kitchen. Mom was bustling around making Kevin's favorite casserole, while Dad sat at the table looking grave. And there was Kevin, dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up like he was posing for some businessman goes casual photo shoot, nursing a beer and looking like someone had just told him his stock portfolio had burst into flames, which, metaphorically speaking, it had. Turns out my brilliant brother started up selling smart toasters with Wi-Fi and voice control, because apparently yelling at your bread is the future, had crashed and burned. The investors had pulled out. The prototype had literally caught fire during a demo, and Kevin was broke. Not just regular broke, but deeply, impressively broke. The kind of broke that comes with collection calls and a credit score that makes loan officers laugh. The kind of broke that sends you running home to the farm you thought you were too good for. And here's where the story takes a turn that would be funny if it weren't happening to me. Dad cleared his throat and announced that the farm would be Kevin's chance to rebuild, that he had made some calls and arranged for Kevin to take over management of the farm operations. The farm, my farm, the one I'd been sweating over for 10 years, the one I'd been promised would be mine someday. That farm. I stood there speechless as Dad explained how Kevin's business experience would modernize our operations and take us into the 21st century. As if I hadn't been the one researching new irrigation systems and more efficient feed options, while Kevin was busy figuring out how to make toasters that post Instagram. My future was being handed to my brother on a silver platter, and I was expected to serve it to him with a smile. Mom tried to soften the blow, saying how nice it would be to have both her boys working together on the family legacy. Dad quoted Proverbs about how wisdom comes from many counselors, his way of telling me to shut up and listen to Kevin's expertise. And Kevin? He had the audacity to pat me on the shoulder and say he had big plans for our little farm. Our farm. The farm he hadn't set foot on in years, except for Christmas and the occasional Sunday dinner, when he needed Mom to do his laundry. The next few days were a special kind of hell. Kevin spent more time on his phone than actually working, but he had plenty of time to tell me how everything I was doing was wrong. He called me Tractor Boy when I tried to explain why his idea to immediately convert half our acreage to organic wouldn't work without a transition plan. Every time I heard him say, "You didn't go to college, so maybe leave the thinking me," I mentally measured him for a compartment in the combine. It wouldn't take much modification, really. Just a small adjustment to the intake. But as much as I fantasized about farm equipment mishaps, I kept my head down and my mouth shut. At night, I'd lie in bed staring at the ceiling, feeling like I was 16 again, powerless, overlooked, and stuck in Kevin's shadow. My life's work was being treated like an internship, and my opinion wasn't worth the dirt under my fingernails. Kevin thinks he's Wall Street, and I'm just this unpaid intern who happens to know how to drive a tractor. The sad part is, my parents seem to agree with him. After a particularly frustrating day where Kevin suggested we sell our dairy cows because milk alternatives are trending, I grabbed my truck keys and headed to Sam's place. I needed the sanctuary of his barn, the simple wisdom of an old man who valued tradition, and maybe a sip or two of that moonshine. Sam took one look at my face and wordlessly handed me a jar of clear liquid that smelled like gasoline and tasted like fire. He didn't ask what was wrong. He just sat in his lawn chair and waited for me to either talk or explode. After the moonshine stopped burning my esophagus, I told him everything about Kevin's return, the farm being handed to him, my decade of work being dismissed. Sam listened, nodding occasionally, his weathered face giving nothing away. When I finally ran out of steam, Sam gestured his pigeons, circling overhead in the fading light. Your grandpa Ellis used to say that life is like pigeon racing. It's not always the fastest bird that wins, but the one who knows where it's going. I snorted. Well, I thought I knew where I was going. Turns out the finish line got moved while I wasn't looking. Sam shook his head slowly. The race ain't over yet, son. Sometimes the bird has to fly through a storm before it finds its way home. That's the thing about Sam. He talks in metaphors that sound like greeting card poetry, but somehow still make you feel better. We sat in silence for a while, watching the last of the day's light fade from the sky. Finally, Sam stood up a grunt, his knees popping like bubble wrap. Come on, he said, leading me into his barn. In the back corner, behind stacks of ancient farming magazines and coffee, cans full of odd-sized screws, he pulled out a dusty wooden box. Inside was a collection of trophies and ribbons, Grandpa L's pigeon racing awards. Sam picked up a small gold cup, tarnished with age. This one was from the Interstate Championship of '72. Ellis's bird flew 300 miles in a single day to win this. I turned the trophy over my hands, trying to imagine my grandfather's pride, trying to connect with a legacy I'd never known was mine. Your grandpa wasn't born into racing, Sam continued. His daddy, your great-grandpa, was all about cattle and crops, just like your dad. But Ellis found his own path, created something that was just his. He put the trophy back and closed the box carefully. Maybe it's time you thought about what's really yours, Tommy. Not what was promised to you, but what you want to build. I drove home slowly that night, Sam's words echoing in my head. The farm had always been my future because I'd never considered an alternative. It was my inheritance, my burden, my purpose. But what if it wasn't? What if, like Grandpa L, I could carve out something that was uniquely mine, something no one could take away or hand to Kevin on a whim? The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. I had no money, no education beyond high school, and no skills that weren't related to agriculture. But for the first time in years, I felt something stirring inside me that felt dangerously like hope. The next morning, before dawn broke, I drove back to Sam's. I didn't go to the house. It was too early even for an old farmer like him. Instead, I parked by the barn and walked over to the pigeon loft. The birds were just waking up, cooing softly in the pre-dawn light. I watched them through the wire mesh. These descendants of champions, these living connections to a grandfather I never knew. Pigeons aren't just birds, I whispered, recalling Grandpa's words. They're the wings of your soul. I stood there, hands shoved in my pockets, watching the birds while the eastern sky slowly brightened. My future stretched before me like an unplanted field, full of potential but requiring decisions about what to grow, when to harvest, how to proceed. If I stayed, I'd lose myself in Kevin's shadow. But where would I go? What would I do? I had calluses and determination. But in today's economy, those weren't exactly in-demand skills. My fists clenched at my sides as the first rays of sunlight touched the barn roof. The pigeons rustled inside their loft, eager to be released for their morning flight. ready to stretch their wings against the limitless sky. I envied them their certainty, their instinct. No matter how far they flew, they always knew the way home. I just needed to figure out where mine was. I'd like to say I slept well that night after my revelation at Sam's pigeon loft, that I went home with a clear plan and the courage to execute it. Truth is, I tossed and turned until my alarm blared at 4:30, then stumbled through my chores like a zombie with a hangover. Kevin spent breakfast talking about vertical integration, while I silently contemplated how many corn kernels I could fit in his precious BMW's gas tank before it caused serious damage. Just another Tuesday in paradise, until my phone rang during lunch. It was Sam's daughter, Linda. I'd only met her a few times over the years. She lived in Cedar Rapids and didn't visit often. Her voice sounded strange, hollow. Sam was dead. Heart attack early that morning. They found him in his barn, slumped over near the pigeon loft, feed bucket still in his hand. The world tilted sideways. Sam, who seemed as permanent as the oak trees lining his property, who survived Vietnam and a tornado that took half his house in '86, who drank moonshine like water, gone. Just like that. The funeral was small, just family and a handful of old-timers who remembered the glory days of racing pigeons alongside Sam and my grandpa. I stood in the back of the church, throat tight, watching strangers talk about a man who'd been more of a mentor to me than my own father. Linda approached me after the service. She looked exhausted, dark circles under eyes that were the same bright blue as Sam's. She was selling the farm. She said, there would be an auction next weekend. Equipment, furniture, everything, including the pigeons. Those words hit me like a physical blow. Sam's birds, the descendants of my grandfather's champions, the last racing pigeons in 3 counties as far as I knew. Sam always said they were the last wings of Iowa, the final feathered echo of tradition that had once brought men together across miles of farmland. Linda must have seen something in my face because she squeezed my arm and said she'd understand if I couldn't make it to the auction. Too painful. I nodded dumbly, already knowing I wouldn't miss it for anything. The days before the auction crawled by. Kevin's grand plans for the farm now included selling off our dairy herd entirely and converting that barn into an agricultural education center where city folks could pay to learn how to milk cows we no longer had. Dad thought this was brilliant, which made me seriously question if our well water had been contaminated with something that destroyed brain cells. I nodded and smiled and calculated how much money I had saved. $812, carefully tucked away for replacing the transmission in my pickup. Not even enough for a decent used car, let alone starting a new life somewhere. Saturday morning dawned clear and cool, the kind of perfect fall day that usually makes me grateful to be a farmer, to work outdoors among the changing leaves and harvested fields. Today, it just felt like the universe was mocking me with its beauty while my chest ached with grief and uncertainty. I arrived at Sam's place an hour before the auction was set to begin. Cars and trucks already lined the long gravel driveway. Farmers looking for equipment bargains. Antique dealers eyeing the vintage furniture. Neighbors coming to claim a memento of the old man who'd been a fixture in this community for 7 decades. I walked past Sam's house, unable to stomach the sight of strangers pawing through his belongings, and headed straight for the barn. A small crowd had gathered there, most of them old-timers I recognized from the funeral. They nodded as I approached, a silent acknowledgement of shared loss. The auctioneer was setting up his stand near the barn entrance, arranging lots on folding tables. And there, in a wire cage near the end, were Sam's pigeons. 2 birds, a male and female, their blue-gray feathers iridescent in the morning light. They cooed softly, seemingly undisturbed by the commotion around them. I moved closer, drawn by something I couldn't name. These weren't just birds. They were living links to my grandfather, to Sam, to a heritage I'd never fully appreciated until now. According to the tag on their cage, they were Belgian racing homers, direct descendants of the champions my grandfather had raised in the 70s. My heart pounded against my ribs like it was trying to escape. These weren't just any pigeons. They were the last of a bloodline, carriers of something precious, something that belonged to me in a way the farm never truly had. The practical part of my brain, the part that had been trained by years of farm economics, screamed that this was madness. What the hell would I do with racing pigeons? Where would I keep them? How would I feed them when I could barely feed myself? But another voice, deeper and more insistent, whispered that some chances come once in a lifetime, that sometimes the right path looks like the crazy one. The auction began at 10 a.m. sharp. I stood rooted to the spot as household goods, tools, and farm equipment went to the highest bidders. My palms sweated as the auctioneer worked his way through the items, closer and closer to pigeons. Next up, we have a pair of Belgian racing homer pigeons. These birds come from champion bloodlines. Some of you old-timers might remember Ellis Mitchell's birds from back in the day. These are direct descendants. We'll start the bidding at $50. Several hands went up immediately. Apparently, I wasn't the only one who remembered or had heard the stories. The bid quickly rose to 100, then 200. At 300, most of the bidders dropped out, leaving just me and an older man in a John Deere cap who kept eyeing the birds with a calculator's precision. I bid $350. He countered with $400. My mouth went dry as I raised my hand again. $500. He hesitated, then nodded. $600. My entire savings account flashed before my eyes. The transmission my truck desperately needed. The safety net I've been building one painful dollar at a time. Everything I own in the world against two birds that ate seeds and pooped on everything. $700. I heard myself say, voice cracking. The John Deere man stared at me, then shook his head slightly. The auctioneer pointed at me, asking for $750. When no counterbid came, he raised his gavel. $700 going once, going twice. $800. The man in the cap called suddenly, eyes locked on mine now. Every rational thought in my head screamed to stop, to let the birds go, to save my money for something sensible. But my hand rose anyway, almost its own accord. $812, I said, clearly. The entire crowd turned to look at me. The auctioneer blinked. $812, he repeated, then looked at my opponent. Sir, the man in the cap studied me for a long moment, then shook his head and stepped back. A murmur went through the crowd. Sold, to the young man in the blue shirt, for $812. Just like that, I was the owner of 2 racing pigeons and completely, utterly broke. As the crowd dispersed, moving on to the next items, I approached the cage in a daze. The birds looked back at me with bright, intelligent eyes. I swear they knew. I whispered to them, so quietly no one else could hear, "Sorry, Grandpa, if I'm being idiot here." I paid Linda, who seemed surprised but pleased that Sam's birds had sold for so much. She helped me load the cage into my truck, along with a small sack of feed and a few supplies. As I closed the tailgate, she squeezed my arm again. "Dad would be happy to go to Ellis's grandson," she said, and for a moment I could breathe past a knot in my throat. The drive home felt like crossing some invisible boundary. With each mile, I alternated between elation and panic. What had I done? What would I tell my parents? Where would I keep these birds? What was I thinking? By the time I pulled into our driveway, my hands were shaking. I left the birds in the truck and went inside, hoping to slip up to my room unnoticed. No such luck. Dad and Kevin were at the kitchen table, spreadsheets and laptops spread between them like the planning table for a military invasion. They both looked up as I entered. "Where have you been?" Dad asked, frowning. "We needed help with the inventory today." "Sam's auction." I replied, try to sound casual. "Just pay my respects." I might have gotten away with it if Kevin hadn't glanced out the window at that exact moment, spotting the cage in the bed of my truck. "What the hell is that?" he asked, standing up for a better look. And just like that, the jig was up. Dad went outside, Kevin following, as I trailed behind them like a kid caught sneaking cookies. They stared at the pigeon cage, as if I brought home a nuclear bomb. "Are those pigeons?" Dad asked, his voice dangerously quiet. I nodded, suddenly finding a spark of defiance. Racing pigeons. Sam's birds. Descendants of Grandpa's champions, actually. "And how much did these birds cost you?" Dad's face was turning a particular shade of red that usually preceded biblical references to foolishness and prodigal sons. I straightened my spine. $812. The explosion was nuclear. Dad's face went from red to purple as he bellowed about responsibility and priorities, and how I'd thrown away money we needed for the farm. Kevin stood behind him, smirking like he'd just won some long-standing bet on my stupidity. Mom came running out, alarmed by the shouting. She took one look at the scene and tried to mediate, but Dad was too far gone. "Pigeons!" he roared. "You spent money on birds? Are you opening a circus here, Tommy? While your brother and I are trying to save this farm, you're out buying flying rats." "They're racing homers," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "Grandpa made good money with them back in the day." "Your grandfather is dead," Dad snapped. "And this isn't the 1970s. This is a working farm, not a hobby club." Mom put her hand on Dad's arm. "Jim, calm down. Tommy made a mistake, but—" "No, Mom," I interrupted. "It wasn't a mistake." Everyone froze, staring at me like I'd suddenly started speaking in tongues. Maybe I had. These weren't words I'd ever imagined saying aloud. "These birds matter to me," I continued, heart pounding. "They're part of our family legacy, too, just not the part you care about." Dad's jaw clenched. "We're trying to keep this farm afloat, and you're spending money we don't have on birds." "On MY money," I corrected. "Money I save from my own paychecks. Money I earned working dawn to dusk for years on a farm you promised will be mine someday, right until Golden Boy here burned through his startup cash and needed a bailout." Kevin stepped forward, face flushed. "Hey, I'm bringing actual business experience to this operation." "Business experience?" I laughed, a harsh sound even to my own ears. "You sold Wi-Fi toasters that caught on fire. The only thing you're experienced at is failing upward." The silence that followed was deafening. Dad looked like I'd slapped him. Mom had her hand over her mouth. And Kevin looked like he might actually take a swing at me. Dad spoke first, his voice low and controlled. "You will apologize to your brother right now." Something broke inside me, a dam holding back years of resentment and frustration. "No, I won't. You gave him my future, my farm, without even asking me. You spent my entire life telling me to wait, to work hard, that someday this would all be mine." Then Kevin snaps his fingers, and suddenly it's his. "So what? You're buying pigeons to spite us?" Dad demanded. "No," I said, suddenly tired. "I'm buying them because they remind me of who I am apart from this place. Because they belong to a man who respected me. Because for once, I wanted something that was just mine." Dad's expression hardened into something I'd never seen before. Or maybe I just never noticed it. "Well, if these birds mean more to you than this farm, then maybe you should go be with them somewhere else." The words hung in the air like smoke. Mom gasped. Kevin looked surprised and smug. "Jim," Mom started, but Dad held up his hand, silencing her. "No, Marge, I've had enough. He's been sulking and disrespectful ever since Kevin came home. If he can't be part of this family, if he can't support what we're trying to do here, then he needs to figure out his priorities." He turned to me, eyes cold. "Take your birds and go, Tommy. Come back when you're ready to be part of this family again." I'd like to say I had some great parting shot, some devastating final word that would make them realize what they were throwing away. But the truth is, I just nodded, a strange calm settling over me, like I'd been drowning for years and finally broke the surface. "Fine," I said simply. I went inside and packed a duffel bag with clothes, my wallet, and a few personal items. Mom followed me, crying, begging me to apologize to stay. I kissed her cheek and told her I'd call soon. I walked out past Dad and Kevin, still standing by my truck, and put my bag in the passenger seat. I got in, started the engine, which coughed and wheezed like an old cowboy with a lifetime smoking habit, and backed out of the driveway without looking back. I drove until the sun set, no destination in mind, just a need to put distance between me and the only home I'd ever known. Eventually, I pulled into a truck stop, parking in the furthest corner of the lot. In the silence of my cab, with just the dim glow of the dashboard lights, I turned to look at the pigeons. They were huddled together, watching me with their bright, unwavering eyes. Well, I told them, if you guys aren't champions, I'm officially the worst farmer in history. They just cooed in response, seemingly untroubled by the complete derailment of my life. I reached back and stuck a finger through the wire mesh. One of them pecked at it gently, not aggressive, just curious. I turned on the radio, finding a station playing Johnny Cash's "I've Been Everywhere." The irony wasn't lost on me. I hadn't been anywhere, not yet, but for the first time in my life, I could go anywhere I wanted. No chores tie me down, no family expectations weighing on my shoulders. Just me, 2 pigeons, and a pickup truck that might die at any moment. I reclined my seat as far as it would go and stared at the truck stop's neon signs reflecting on my windshield. Maybe this is what freedom feels like, I murmured to my feathered companions. As I drifted toward sleep, Sam's voice echoed in my memory. Sometimes, to find your home, you have to fly into nowhere. I glanced at the birds again, settling into their cage for the night. If you guys let me down, I whispered, I'm joining the circus. With no plan, no money, and nowhere to go, I fell asleep more peacefully than I had in years. Tomorrow would bring something, maybe disaster, maybe opportunity. But whatever it was, it would be mine. As trucks rumbled past on the highway, their headlights briefly illuminating the cab, I dreamed of pigeons circling high above cornfields, their wings catching the sunlight as they flew toward a horizon I couldn't see. 3 days on the road taught me several valuable life lessons. First, sleeping in a pickup truck is about as comfortable as lying on a bag of doorknobs. Second, truck stop showers cost $12 but feel like winning the lottery after days without one. And third, pigeons require a surprise amount of care when you're living like a nomad. I've been zigzagging across the Midwest with no real destination, just a need to keep moving. My bank account had flatlined after buying feed for the birds, and my truck was drinking gas faster than college freshmen at their first frat party. I ended up in Nebraska more by accident than design. My truck started making a noise that sounded like a metal band was performing inside the engine block, and I figured I'd better find somewhere to stop before I was hitchhiking with a bird cage. The town I rolled into was barely big enough to have a name. Maxwell, population probably smaller than my high school graduating class. But they had a farmer's market that Saturday morning, and I figured I might find someone selling cheap produce to supplement the dwindling bird feed. The market was set up in what passed for the town square, a patch of grass with a war memorial and a few park benches. Pickup trucks and folding tables displayed everything from homemade jams to hand-knitted scarves. I parked at the edge of the lot, checked on my pigeons, and headed into the modest crowd with my last $20. I was examining a basket of slightly bruised apples when I felt someone watching me. I turned to find an older man with a weathered face and silver hair staring at me like I was a ghost. Ellis Mitchell's grandson? He asked, his voice deep and resonant, like someone doing a pretty decent Morgan Freeman impression. I nearly dropped the apple one was holding. Yeah, I'm Tommy Mitchell. Did you know my grandfather? The man chuckled, a rich, rolling sound. Knew of him. I was into racing pigeons back in the day. Ellis was a legend. He extended a hand as callous as my own. Bill Hoffman. Say, aren't you the guy who bought Sam Peterson's birds at the auction a couple weeks back? Now I was really confused. How did you? Small world, pigeon racing, Bill said with a shrug. Word gets around. Plus, I was there. Saw you outbid Harlan Jenkins for those birds. He was mighty sore about it, too. So that was who the John Deere cap belonged to. I felt a strange sense of pride knowing I'd beaten a serious competitor, quickly followed by the sobering realization that I still had no idea what I was doing with those birds. Bill looked me up and down, taking in my rumpled clothes and the dark circles under my eyes. Your bird still flying, or did you already eat him? The question was so unexpected, I actually laughed. Still flying. Well, not exactly flying. More like sitting in a cage in my truck, since I got nowhere to keep them. Bill raised an eyebrow. Living rough, huh? I shrugged, not want to get into my family drama with a stranger. Just explore my options. Exploring your options, Bill repeated, nodding thoughtfully. That's a fancy way of saying homeless with expensive birds. I opened my mouth to argue, then closed it again because, well, he wasn't wrong. Bill scratched his chin, looking at me with an intensity that made me want to check if I had something on my face. Tell you what, I've got a farm about 10 miles from here. Need an extra pair of hands for the season. Got an old storage barn you could fix up for yourself, and those birds if you're interested. My first instinct was suspicion. Strange men offering lodging to strangers usually featured in the kind of news stories that ended badly. But there was something solid about Bill, something that reminded me of Sam. Why would you do that for someone you just met? I asked. 3 reasons, Bill said, holding up fingers as he counted. 1, good farm help is hard to find. 2, I've been curious about Sam's birds ever since I heard they were sold. And 3, he paused, a slight smile creasing his weathered face. I got a soft spot for fools on impossible quests. Reminds me of myself 40 years ago. A barn, a job, a place for my birds. It sounded too good to be true. It probably was. But my alternatives were sleeping in my truck until it finally died or crawling back to my parents' farm with my tail between my legs. A barn, huh? I said, trying to sound casual. That's like a 5-star hotel compared to my truck's back seat. Bill laughed. Don't get too excited. It's got a dirt floor and probably more mice than the health department would approve of, but it's got 4 walls and a roof that mostly doesn't leak. Sold, I said, extending my hand to shake on it. Bill's farm turned out to be a modest operation. 80 acres of corn, a small herd of beef cattle, and an orchard of apple trees that had seen better days. The main house was a sturdy 2-story farmhouse painted white with navy blue trim, a covered porch wrapped around the front, complete with a swing that creaked in the breeze. The barn he'd mentioned was behind the main barn, a smaller structure that had once been used for storing hay, but now housed an eclectic collection of broken farm equipment and dust-covered furniture. Home sweet home, Bill said, sliding open the door to reveal a space that smelled of old wood and forgotten things. You might want to check for raccoons before you move in. I stepped inside, already calculating what it would take to make the space livable. It wasn't pretty, but I'd slept in worse places over the past couple weeks. And more importantly, there was plenty of room to build a proper loft for my pigeons. I can work with this, I said, already feeling a strange sense of ownership. Over the next few days, I fell into a routine. Up at dawn to help Bill with the cattle, then regular farm maintenance, fixing fences, clearing irrigation ditches, the kind of work I've been doing my whole life. The only difference was that Bill actually said, "Thank you," at the end of each day, something my father had apparently never learned how to do. In the evenings, I worked on converting the storage barn into something habitable. Bill let me use scrap lumber and leftover building materials, and I scavenged the rest from the town dump. By the end of the first week, I had a crude but functional living space, a platform bed raised off the dirt floor, a makeshift table and chair, and a small wood-burning stove that only smoked a little when the wind was wrong. Most importantly, I built a proper pigeon loft along the south wall, where the sun would keep it warm. I constructed nesting boxes, perches, and outdoor flight pen where the birds could exercise their wings. It wasn't fancy, but comparing it to what most racing enthusiasts had, it was practically the Ritz-Carlton of pigeon accommodations. Bill would stop by occasionally to inspect my progress, offering suggestions or the odd piece of hardware from his own collection. He never said much about my work, but I caught him nodding approvingly when he thought I wasn't looking. I'd been at Bill's farm for about 3 weeks when I first met his daughter. I was outside my barn, shirtless in Nebraska summer heat, installing a window I'd found at a garage sale in town, when a battered blue Toyota pickup pulled up. The woman who stepped out was about my age, maybe a year older, wearing ripped jeans and a faded Fleetwood Mac t-shirt, her dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She stopped short when she saw me, one eyebrow raised in a perfect arch. Either Dad's gotten a lot younger and better looking, or you're the stray he mentioned picking up at the farmer's market. I suddenly became very aware that I was half naked and covered in sawdust. That would be me, Tommy Mitchell, the stray. She looked me over with the critical eye of someone assessing a used car. Emily Hoffman, So what's your story, Tommy Mitchell? Dad was pretty vague on the details, just said you were Ellis Mitchell's grandson and had racing pigeons. I gestured to the loft I'd built. That's pretty much the whole story. Me, 2 pigeons and questionable life choices. A smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. Dad collects strays like other people collect stamps. Last year, it was a 3-legged dog. Year before that, a Vietnam vet who lived in our guest room for 6 months. What happened to them? I asked. The dog's still around. He's probably napping on Dad's porch swing. The vet found his daughter in Oregon and moved out there. She tilted her head, studying me. What about you? Just passing through until something better comes along. It was a fair question, but one I didn't have an answer for. What was I doing here? Was this a temporary pit stop or something more? Honestly, I have no idea. I admitted I'm just taking it one day at a time. Emily nodded, apparently satisfied with my honesty, if not my life planning skills. Well, while you're figuring it out, want to come up to the house for lunch? Dad makes a mean grilled cheese. And just like that, I became a regular at the Hoffman kitchen table. Most days I'd work alongside Bill, then join him and Emily for dinner. She taught high school English in the next town over, but was home for the summer break. In the evenings, she'd often stop by my barn with a beer or lemonade, curious about my pigeon project. Pigeons, she teased early on. Real farmers keep cows, not birds. But I caught her watching as I gently handled my birds, checking their wings, talking to them softly. I explained the basics of racing, showing her how to tell a good racing bird from an average one. The wingspan, the muscle-to-weight ratio, the intelligence in their eyes. To my surprise, my original pair had produced eggs about a month after I'd settled in. Now I had 4 squabs baby pigeons, in addition to the original pair. I'd built a small breeding record system, tracking their lineage back to my grandfather's champions. Bill stopped by one evening while I was feeding the growing flock. He watched silently for a while, then shook his head with a chuckle. "You're either a genius or the most stubborn fool I've ever met," he said, but the warmth in his voice took any sting out of the words. "I'll take that as a compliment," I replied, closing the pen and dusting feed from my hands. "As well you should," Bill said. He reached out tentatively to stroke one of the birds. "They're good stock. Your grandfather would be proud." Coming from anyone else, it might have sounded like an empty platitude, but from Bill, who had known of my grandfather and understood the tradition I was trying to resurrect, it hit me right in the chest. Over time, Emily's curiosity about the pigeons grew into genuine interest. She started joining me for training sessions, where I'd take the birds a short distance away and release them, training them to return to their new home. It was during these sessions, sitting in her truck, waiting for the birds to fly back, that we really began to talk. She told me about her college years in Lincoln, her brief stint in Chicago before deciding city life wasn't for her, her dreams of writing a novel someday. I told her about growing up on the farm, about Kevin and my parents, about the expectations I'd never quite managed to meet. "So you were the black sheep," she said one evening as we drove home from a training run. "I get that. Dad wanted a son who'd take over farm. Instead, he got me, who'd rather read books than brand cattle. But he seemed so supportive of you," I said, surprised. Emily shrugged. "Now, sure, but we had some legendary fights when I was in high school and announced I was going to college instead of staying on the farm. Eventually, he came around, realized having a daughter who was happy doing what she loved was better than having one who was miserable doing what he wanted." She glanced over at me. "Your parents might surprise you, too, given time." I snorted. "I doubt it. Not as long as Kevin's their golden boy." "They're lost, then," she said simply, and changed the topic to her latest vinyl finds at a record store in Lincoln. I found myself looking forward to those moments with Emily more than anything else. Her sarcastic humor, her passion for old music, the way she called me on my BS without making me feel small. She wasn't like any woman I'd known back home. As summer turned to fall, my pigeons grew stronger and more numerous. I now had 6 birds in total, the original pair and 4 young ones that were nearly ready for serious training. I'd been studying racing techniques online at the town library, learning about nutrition, training regimens, and competition strategies. Emily would tease me about my obsession. "Your pigeons look like they're planning a strike," she'd say, watching them perch in a row. Pretty sure I saw one making a picket sign that said more seeds, less work. But she'd also bring articles she'd found about racing or mention something she'd heard on the radio about a competition 2 counties over. One crisp October morning, about a year after I'd arrived at Bill's farm, Emily burst into my barn without knocking. A habit I'd given up trying to break her of. "Tommy, you got to see this." She thrust her phone in my face, showing a website for the American Racing Pigeon Union. I took the phone, scanning the page she'd pulled up. It was an announcement for a major race being held in Oklahoma the following spring, with a prize purse of $50,000 for the winner. My heart skipped. $50,000 was life-changing money. It was a farm down payment. It was a future. "This is serious business," I said, reading the details. "Birds have to qualify in regional events. There's an entry fee, transportation costs." "But your birds could do it," Emily insisted, perching on the edge of my makeshift table. "That one you named Elle flies like he's got a rocket pack, and you've been training them for months now." She wasn't wrong. My birds, especially Elle, named after my grandfather, had shown remarkable speed and homing instinct. In our training runs, he consistently returned first, even when I'd taken them over 30 miles away. "Even if they could compete," I said slowly, "we're talking about birds from professional racers, people who've been doing this for decades. My little homemade operation is exactly the kind of underdog story people love," Emily interrupted. "Iowa farm boy with his grandfather's racing bloodline, taking on the big shots. It's practically a movie plot already." I laughed at her enthusiasm. "You've been grading too many creative writing assignments." But the seed had been planted. I couldn't stop thinking about it. Couldn't stop calculating what it would take, whether my birds really had a chance. That evening, Bill joined me at my barn. He brought a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses, a sure sign of a serious conversation. We sat on the bench outside, watching the sunset paint the cornfields gold. "Emily told me about the Oklahoma race," he said, pouring 2 fingers into each glass. I nodded, taking the offered drink. "She thinks I should enter." "And what do you think?" he asked, eyeing me over the rim of his glass. I swirled the amber liquid, gathering my thoughts. "I think it's a long shot. I think I'd probably lose my entry fee and come home embarrassed." Bill nodded, taking a slow sip before responding. "Dreams are like pigeons, Tommy. You can set them free, and they'll either come back to you carrying something valuable, or you'll end up with an empty loft. But you'll never know unless you let them fly." I nearly choked on my whiskey. "Did you just make that up?" Bill grinned. "Maybe, or maybe I've been saving it for the right moment." We sat in companionable silence as dusk settled over the farm. In the distance, I could hear the low of cattle and the familiar creak of the porch swing. "I miss home sometimes," I admitted suddenly. Not the farm, exactly, but the familiarity of it. Knowing every inch of the land, the rhythm of the seasons. Bill nodded. "That's natural. But home isn't always where you start out. Sometimes it's where you end up." He finished his whiskey and stood, joints popping. "Sleep on it. No need to decide tonight." But I think I'd already decided. The next morning, I started researching qualifying races, calculating costs, and drawing up a training schedule that would make an Olympic coach proud. Emily found me surrounded by notes, my laptop open to the Racing Pigeon forums. She didn't say anything, just smiled and handed me a coffee. "Let's do this," I said, looking up at her. "Let's enter the Oklahoma race." Her smile widened. "I was hoping you'd say that. Let's show them that Iowa and Nebraska can still fly." In that moment, with the morning sun streaming through my barn window, my birds cooing softly in their loft, and Emily's eyes bright with excitement, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a very long time: purpose. A clear goal, a direction, a chance to prove myself on my own terms. Everyone around us thought it was foolish. Bill's farmer friends would chuckle when they heard about my bird project. The few racing enthusiasts I connected with online warned that first-timers rarely placed, let alone won, but their doubts only fueled my determination. As Emily and I stood by the loft that evening, watching my bird soar in wide circles above the farm before returning home, I felt a strange certainty settle in my chest. "If they don't let me down," I said quietly, "I might finally prove who I am." Emily nudged my shoulder with hers. "They won't let you down. And even if they do, you've already proven who you are, Tommy Mitchell. To me, to Dad, and most importantly, to yourself." I looked at her then, really looked at her, this strange, wonderful woman who'd walked into my makeshift home and somehow made it feel complete. And I realized that whatever happened in Oklahoma, I'd already found something I hadn't known I was looking for. The racing season was months away, and we had a lot of work to do. But for the first time since I'd left my parents' farm with nothing but 2 pigeons and a broken-down truck, I wasn't just running from something. I was flying towards something better. Winter in Nebraska is not for the faint of heart. The wind doesn't just blow. It slices through your clothes like they're made of tissue paper. The cold doesn't just chill. It crystallizes your bones. Bill warned me that my converted barn would be a bit drafty, which turned out to be Midwestern understatement for you might as well be sleeping outside. But the birds needed to train regardless of the weather. Racing pigeons aren't seasonal athletes. They need consistent flight time to build their muscles and homing instincts. So every morning, while the rest of the world was still huddled under electric blankets, I was out with my birds, my breath clouding in the pre-dawn air. Emily thought I'd lost my mind. "Normal people don't stand in fields when it's 15 degrees, she'd say, passing me coffee from the thermos she'd brought. But she'd be right there beside me, her nose red with cold, watching the birds circle overhead before heading out on their training routes. By January, I had established a serious training regimen. The birds would fly twice daily, once in the morning and again in the afternoon. I'd drive them varying distances from the farm and release them, tracking their flight times and return rates. I'd studied the techniques of champion racers, adapting their methods to fit my limited resources. L, the male from my original pair, quickly established himself as something special. While the other birds were good, L was exceptional. He consistently returned first, even when released from new locations. His flight was stronger, his homing instinct sharper. He flew like he knew my entire future was riding on his wings. I'd expanded the loft as the months passed, adding specialized compartments for breeding, training, and rest. My makeshift home remained Spartan. A bed, a table, a chair, and not much else. But the pigeon loft was state-of-the-art, at least by the standards of a broke farm kid with more determination than money. "Your priorities are showing," Emily teased one evening, perched on my single chair while I sat on an upturned bucket. "Birds get custom-built luxury condos, while you're sleeping on what I'm pretty sure is the same mattress they use in prison." She wasn't wrong. Every spare dollar went to the birds. Premium feed, vitamin supplements, specialized training equipment. My diet consisted mainly of ramen noodles and whatever Emily or Bill brought over, claiming they accidentally made too much. "If this works," I told her, "I can buy all the fancy mattresses I want." "And if it doesn't?" she asked, not unkindly. I shrugged. "Then I'll have the best-trained, best-fed racing pigeons in the unemployment line." What I didn't say was how much I'd come to love the birds themselves, not just what they represented. Each had a distinct personality. Elle was confident and focused, while one of the younger females, whom Emily had named Amelia Earhart, because she always looks like she's on an adventure, was curious and fearless. They weren't just lottery tickets with feathers. They were my partners, my team. As spring approached, I registered for qualifying races leading up to the Oklahoma Championship. To someone outside the racing world, the whole system might seem bizarre. So let me break it down. Racing pigeons compete by being transported to a release point hundreds of miles from their home loft. All birds are released simultaneously, and they race back to their respective homes. Each bird carries a special electronic band that records the exact time it returns to its loft. Since the lofts are at different distances from the release point, the winning bird isn't necessarily the one that gets home first. It's the one with the highest velocity, measured in yards per minute. Think of it as calculating each bird's average speed over the entire journey. My first qualifying race was in March, a relatively short 100-mile event in eastern Nebraska. I loaded Elle and 2 other birds into special carrying crates at 4 a.m., then drove 2 hours to meet the race organizers, a group of mostly older men who eyed me with a suspicion reserved for outsiders in any niche hobby. Mitchell, one of them said, checking his clipboard as I unloaded my birds. Any relation to Ellis Mitchell from Iowa? My grandfather, I replied, feeling a strange pride as several heads turned my way with newfound interest. No kidding, the man said, his weathered face breaking into a smile. Your granddad's birds were something else back in the day. Beat mine more times than I care to remember. Just like that, I was no longer a complete outsider. I wasn't fully accepted. That would take proven results. But being Ellis Mitchell's grandson opened doors that might have otherwise remained closed. The birds were loaded into a specially designed truck with compartments to ensure each competitor's pigeons remained separate. The truck would drive to the release point while the racers returned home to wait. By noon, I was pacing outside my loft, checking my watch every 30 seconds, even though I knew the birds wouldn't arrive for at least another hour. Emily sat on the bench I'd built outside the barn, pretending to read a book, but actually watching me with equal parts amusement and concern. If Elle loses, I'm officially renaming him Chicken, she announced, turning a page without actually reading it. If Elle loses, I might change my name to Chicken, I muttered, scanning the sky for the 100th time. The first bird appeared as a tiny speck against the blue, growing larger as it descended. Not Elle, one of my younger birds, a male I'd named Mercury. He landed on the loft entrance with a flutter of wings, triggering the electronic timer as he crossed the sensor. 20 minutes later, all my birds were home, with Elle arriving second, respectable, but not the dominant performance I'd hoped for. The official results wouldn't be available until evening when all times were calculated, but I knew we hadn't won. We finished 12th out of 36 entries. Not bad for a first outing, the old-timers assured me, but I'd need to do much better to qualify for Oklahoma. The next qualifying race went better, 8th place. The one after that, 5th. Each time, Elle's performance improved, as if he were learning the game. By late April, we'd secured the points needed to qualify for the championship. The Oklahoma race was scheduled for the second weekend in May. 300 miles of open country between the release point in northern Texas and our loft in Nebraska. With a $50,000 prize for first place, it had attracted top competitors from across the Midwest. The night before we were set to leave, Bill stopped by with a bottle of his good whiskey. Nervous? He asked, pouring us each a finger's worth. Terrified, I admitted there was no point in pretending otherwise. Bill nodded, taking a thoughtful sip. Your grandfather was the same way before big races. Could barely keep food down. I looked up sharply. You knew my grandfather personally? You said you just knew of him. Bill smiled mysteriously. Racing world is small. Our paths crossed a few times. I wanted to press for details, but Bill steered the conversation back to the upcoming race, offering last-minute advice about weather patterns and feeding schedules. By the time he left, I was too focused on final preparations to wonder about the connection between Bill and my grandfather. Emily drove with me to Oklahoma, my birds secured in their travel crates in the back of her pickup. We talked about everything except the race. Her plans to start a master's degree in the fall, my ideas for expanding the loft if we won, the new album by some indie band she was obsessed with. The race headquarters was a converted warehouse on the outskirts of Tulsa, filled with competitors checking in birds and comparing notes. Emily whistled low as we entered. I didn't realize this was such a big deal, she murmured, taking in the sponsor banners and professional camera crews. It was a bigger production than I'd expected, too. Pigeon racing isn't exactly a mainstream sport in America, but it has a devoted following, particularly in rural communities and certain urban centers. And with $50,000 on the line, this event had drawn serious attention. We checked in my birds, ensuring their electronic bands were properly registered and their health certificates approved. Elle seemed unfazed by the commotion, looking around with the same confident bearing He showed back home. Your bird acts like he owns the place, commented a heavy-set man in overalls as he entered his own birds at the next station. Family trait. I replied with more confidence than I felt. His great-grandfather was Ellis Mitchell's champion. The man's eyebrows shot up. No kidding? Well, we'll see if the bloodline holds tomorrow. That night in our motel room, I couldn't sleep. Emily had insisted on getting 2 rooms. I'm not listening to you toss and turn all night, but ended up in mine anyway, sitting cross-legged on the bed opposite mine as I obsessively checked weather reports. There's a storm system moving in, I said, showing her the radar on my phone. Could hit right during race time. Emily took the phone from my hand and set it on the nightstand. You've trained them in wind, rain, and that freak April snowstorm. They can handle it. She was right, of course. We'd practiced in nearly every condition Nebraska could throw at us. But I couldn't shake the sense that everything, all those months of work, all my hopes of future, hinge on factors beyond my control. Morning came after a night of fitful sleep. The sky was ominously dark as we drove to the release point, a vast open field where dozens of trucks were already parked. Race officials hurried about, consulting with meteorologists and checking equipment. We're moving up the release time, one official announced through a bullhorn. Storm's coming in faster than expected. Birds go up in 30 minutes. Competitors rushed to make final preparations. I checked Elle and my other 2 entries one last time, feeling their keels, inspecting their wings, whispering encouragements that were as much for me as for them. Emily stood nearby, uncharacteristically quiet. When I finished and stepped back, she surprised me by pulling me into a tight hug. They're going to fly like their tails are on fire, she said fiercely. And I'm going to force you to listen to my entire ABBA collection if they don't. Despite everything, I laughed. Threat noted. The birds were loaded into their compartments on the release trailer. The sky grew darker and a wind picked up, bending the tall grass of the field. Official vehicles began leaving. There was no point in staying at the release point once the birds were up. Everyone had to get back to their respective lofts to await the arrivals. We were halfway to the car when a massive collective whoosh made us turn. The trailer doors had opened, releasing over 200 pigeons simultaneously. They rose as one great cloud, circling briefly to orient themselves before streaming away in roughly the same direction, north, toward home. The drive back was tense. Rain started falling when we were an hour out, light at first, but quickly becoming a downpour. Lightning flashed in the distance. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. What if they get caught in the storm? I asked, not really expecting an answer. They'll find a way through, Emily said with a certainty I wished I shared. Or they'll wait it out and come home when it passes. But waiting wasn't an option in a race. Every minute delayed was velocity lost. By the time we reached the farm, the storm was in full force. Rain came down in sheets, and lightning cracked with alarming frequency. The first birds wouldn't arrive for at least another hour, given the distance, but I set up outside anyway, under a hastily constructed tarp shelter next to the loft. Emily disappeared into the house and returned with 2 raincoats, hot coffee, and sandwiches. Bill joined us under the tarp, binoculars in hand despite the poor visibility. Good racing birds can navigate through worse than this, he assured me, though his frequent glances at the sky betrayed his own concern. I knew many of my competitors would already be seeing returns by now. Racing pigeons fly at different speeds depending on conditions, but the fastest birds might be making a home to closer lofts while we still waited. There was nothing to do but watch the sky and hope. An hour passed. Then, too, Bill checked the race's online forum on his phone, reporting that about 40% of the birds had been recorded as returned to various lofts across the region. None of mine had shown up yet. Soon, the daylight began to fade, adding another layer of worry. Birds don't fly well in darkness, and if mine didn't arrive soon, they might have to find shelter for night, effectively eliminating them from the race. They might have diverted, I said finally, voice hollow. Found shelter somewhere. Emily squeezed my hand but said nothing. What was there to say? If my birds didn't return today, the race was lost. Even if they came back tomorrow healthy and whole, it would be a crushing defeat. The rain eventually slowed to a drizzle. The oppressive dark clouds thinned slightly, allowing weak late afternoon sunlight to break through. Still no birds. I was about to suggest we go inside when Emily suddenly straightened, pointing. I followed her gaze, squinting at a tiny speck moving against clouds. It was coming from the wrong direction, west instead of south, but it was definitely a bird, and it was heading straight for our loft. As it came closer, I could make out the distinctive pattern of Elle's wings, the rhythm of his flight that I'd observed hundreds of times during training. But something was wrong. His path was erratic. His right wing held an odd angle. He's hurt. I breathed, heart sinking even as hope surged that he'd made it back at all. Elle landed clumsily on the loft entrance, triggering the electronic timer. His feathers were matted, and there was a small wound on his wing. Nothing life-threatening, but enough to have affected his flight. I gently moved him to a separate recovery compartment, checking him over for other injuries. "Is he okay?" Emily asked, peering over my shoulder. "He will be," I said, relief making my voice shake. "Looks like he might have been clipped by some debris in the storm or had a run-in with a hawk. But he made it home." My other two birds arrived a few minutes later, both exhausted but uninjured. The fact that all three had made it back through the storm was already a victory of sorts. But I had no illusions about winning. Coming in this late, after so many other competitors' birds had already returned, our chances seemed slim. Or so I thought. When the official results were calculated and posted online that evening, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. First place. What? How is that possible? I asked Bill, who was checking the results on his tablet. Tons of birds came in before mine. Bill smiled, pointing to the explanation. "Look at the calculated velocity. Remember, it's not just about which bird gets home first. It's about how fast they flew relative to the distance. Your loft is one of the farthest from the release point, nearly 20 miles farther than most competitors. Elle maintained a higher average speed over that longer distance, even with his injury." I stared at the screen in disbelief. Elle hadn't just survived the storm. He'd conquered it. First place. Emily shouted, throwing her arms around me. "Tommy, you did it. $50,000. I couldn't speak. My throat had closed up and my vision blurred with unexpected tears. This wasn't just about the money, though that was life-changing enough. This was validation. Proof that I'd been right to follow this crazy dream, to believe in something when everyone else thought I was a fool. Bill clapped a hand on my shoulder, his weathered face split in a wide grin. "Ellis would have been proud," he said simply, and somehow that meant more than all the prize money. I spent the evening with Elle, gently tending his injured wing and feeding him special treats, whispering thanks that probably sounded insane to anyone but another racer. The award ceremony was held the next day in the same warehouse. Elle was presented as a champion, his picture taken for racing magazines and websites. The oversized check for $50,000 felt unreal in my hands. More money than I'd ever had at once, enough to secure my future in ways I'd only dreamed of. But something even more unexpected happened the following morning. As I was tending to Elle's wing, a sleek black car pulled up outside my barn. A man in a tailored suit stepped out, looking distinctly out of place among the puddles and mud of the farmyard. "Mr. Mitchell?" he called, keeping a cautious distance from muck. "My name is James Wong. I represent Mr. Zhang from the Shanghai Pigeon Association. May I have a word?" Emily, who'd arrived with breakfast, raised her eyebrows at me in a silent question. I shrugged. I had no idea what this was about, and gestured for the man to approach. Mr. Wong explained that his employer was one of China's most prominent pigeon racing enthusiasts and collectors. He had been tracking the results of American races for potential breeding stock and had become particularly interested in Elle after his performance in the storm. "Mr. Zhang believes your bird possesses exceptional genetics," Wong explained in precise English. "The combination of speed and durability, particularly the ability to navigate through severe weather, is extremely rare." I nodded, pride swelling in my chest. He's from my grandfather's bloodline. Ellis Mitchell's birds were known for their navigation skills. "Indeed," Wong said, a note of respect entering his voice. Mr. Zhang is prepared to make you an offer for breeding rights to your champion bird. I braced myself, expecting perhaps $100,000, a generous sum even for a championship winner with proven racing abilities. $1.3 million. I actually laughed. Surely I had misheard. I'm sorry, how much? 1.3 million US dollars. Wong repeated calmly, as if he weren't saying something completely insane. For full ownership, the bird would relocate to Mr. Zhang's facilities in Shanghai. I looked at Emily, whose mouth had fallen open, then at Elle, calmly preening his feathers in his recovery compartment, blissfully unaware that he had apparently turned into a feathered Fort Knox. Why? I managed finally. I mean, he's a great bird, but that's the price of genetic certainty, Mr. Mitchell, Wong explained. Your bird demonstrated exceptional navigation abilities under extreme conditions. Combined with his lineage and physical attributes, Mr. Zhang believes he could revolutionize his breeding program. My head spun. $1.3 million. For a bird that ate seeds and pooped on my shoes. For a creature I'd raised from a squab, trained through countless hours, formed a bond with. I need to think about it, I said. Wong handed me a business card with an international number. Of course. Mr. Zhang understands this is not a decision to be made lightly. The offer stands for 1 week. After he left, Emily and I sat in stunned silence, staring at the innocent bird who was apparently worth more than every house in a 3-county radius combined. $1.3 million, Emily finally said, testing the words as if to see if they made any more sense aloud. Tommy, that's life-changing, I finished. Farm buying, future securing money. But, she prompted, clearly hearing the hesitation in my voice. I looked at Elle, remembering all the mornings we spent together, all the times he returned home against the odds, all the hopes I'd pinned on his wings. It feels like selling a piece of my soul, I admitted. Is that crazy? He's just a bird. Emily shook her head. Not crazy. He's not just a bird to you. He's everything you've built here, everything you've become since you left home. She was right, as usual. Elle represented my independence, my connection to my grandfather, my proof that I could succeed on my own terms. The next few days were torture. I barely slept, weighing the decision from every angle. I called other breeders, researched previous high-dollar pigeon sales, even consulted with a financial advisor in town about investment options if I accepted. Elle's wing healed quickly, and soon he was flying again, circling above the farm as if nothing had happened, as if he weren't the center of the biggest decision of my life. On the 6th day, as sunset painted the sky in oranges and pinks, I finally knew what I had to do. I called the number on Wong's card. I'll accept Mr. Zhang's offer, I said when he answered, with 2 conditions. First, I want detailed updates on Elle's life and breeding results. Second, I want first option to purchase any offspring that might be sold outside his program. There was a pause, and I believe Mr. Zhang will find these conditions acceptable. I'll prepare the paperwork immediately. Just like that, I became a millionaire, on paper at least. That night, I sat alone with Elle, talking to him like he could understand. Maybe he could. He'd certainly understood how to find his way home through a storm that had defeated birds with far more experience. You're going to live in China, I told him, stroking his sleek head. Probably in a loft nicer than any house I'll ever own. Don't forget where you came from, though. Elle just cooed softly, leaning into my touch one last time. The next morning, I found Emily at her favorite spot by the creek that ran through the back of Bill's property. She was skipping stones, something she did when she needed to think. I sold him, I said simply. She nodded, not looking surprised. I figured you would. It's too much money to pass up. Yeah. I picked up a flat stone, turning it over in my hands. But it doesn't feel great. It's not supposed to, she said. The right decisions rarely feel good at first. I skipped my stone, watching it bounce 4 times before sinking. So what now? Emily turned to face me fully, her expression serious, but with a hint of something else. Excitement, maybe. Now you decide what to do with your life, Tommy Mitchell. Now you get to choose, not just react. She was right again. For the first time in my life, I had options, real ones, not just illusion of choice within narrow constraints. I took a deep breath, suddenly nervous in a completely different way than I'd been before the race. I was thinking. I started, my heart pounding harder than it had when Elle was missing the storm, that maybe we could decide together about what comes next. Emily's eyebrows rose. Yeah, I said, forcing myself to hold her gaze. If you want. How do you feel about being married to a pigeon tycoon? A slow smile spread across her face. Do I have to share the bedroom with the birds? I laughed, relief flooding through me. No birds in the bedroom. That a firm rule. Then I might be persuaded, she said, stepping closer and taking my hand. But I think you'll have to convince me properly. And there, by the creek where she taught me to skip stones the previous summer, with the morning sun warming our faces and the future suddenly wide open before us, I did exactly that. Later, as we walked back to the farm hand in hand, I caught myself looking up at the sky, watching a flock of wild birds wheeling overhead. Emily said, follow my gaze, we could build something amazing with that money. Not just for us, but for others too. I've been thinking the same thing, I admitted. A breeding and training center. Maybe a place where kids could learn about racing. Something to keep the tradition alive. Emily squeezed my hand. I like that idea. A lot. As we reached the farm, I saw Bill watching us from the porch, a knowing smile on his face. He raised his coffee mug in a silent toast when he noticed our linked hands. The paperwork was signed the following day. Wong arranged for Elle to be transported in a special carrier with climate control and monitoring systems, a far cry from the homemade crate I'd been using. As they loaded him into the car, I felt a pang of loss so sharp it took my breath away. Sometimes one bird can change everything, I murmured, if you believe in him enough. Elle gave me one last look, his bright eyes seeming to hold all the wisdom in the world, before the carrier door closed. I stood in the yard long after the black car had disappeared down the dusty road, holding the certified check that represented a future I'd never dared imagine, a future that was now mine, ours, to shape however we wanted. 6 months after selling Elle, I was knee-deep in plans for our racing center when I received a call from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, assuming it was another investment advisor wanting to help with my newfound wealth. Luckily, I answered. It was my mother. Her voice sounded smaller somehow, stripped of the cheerful certainty that had colored my childhood. She talked around a real reason for her call for nearly 5 minutes, asking about the weather in Nebraska, commenting on a recipe she tried recently, wondering if I'd seen some TV show I'd never heard of. Then finally, the truth came out. The family farm was in foreclosure. After I left, Kevin had doubled down on his modernization plans. He'd leveraged the farm to invest in cryptocurrency, convinced he'd found the next big thing. Instead, he found what countless speculators before him had discovered. Digital fortunes can evaporate as quickly as morning dew. Mom asked if I could talk to my father. Not for money, she insisted, just to mend fences between us. But I could hear the desperation behind her words. The careful way she mentioned the financial challenges they were facing. How her voice broke slightly when she said they might have to sell the house and find somewhere smaller very soon. I knew what she couldn't bring herself to directly ask. They weren't just losing the farm business. They were losing their home. 2 days later, Emily and I were driving across the Iowa state line. She squeezed my hand as we passed the familiar landmarks of my youth, the rusted tractor that had sat abandoned in the Johnsons' field for at least 30 years, the crooked mailbox at the county road turnoff, the ancient oak tree that had survived 3 lightning strikes and countless storms. The farm looked smaller than I remembered, the paint on the house more faded, the barn roof more warped. Or maybe I was just seeing it through different eyes. Kevin's BMW was gone, replaced by a worn Honda Civic that had seen better days. Mom burst through the screen door before I'd even cut the engine, moving faster than I'd seen her move in years. Dad followed more slowly, his once imposing frame somehow diminished, his shoulders rounded under the weight of failure. The kitchen table where we gathered looked exactly the same, the scarred with bearing witness to decades of family meals, arguments, and decisions. The conversation started awkwardly, with careful questions about my bird business, as Dad called it. Then Kevin arrived, and subtlety went out the window. He looked thinner, the designer clothes replaced by off-the-rack jeans and a plain button-down. But his eyes lit up when he saw me, not with brotherly affection, but with the desperate recognition of a drowning man spotting a life raft. "Tommy, man, you're looking good. Heard about your windfall. Pretty incredible, right? $1 million for a pigeon." I corrected him. 1.3 million. For a champion racing pigeon with exceptional genetics. Kevin laughed too loudly. Right. So, listen, I've been working on this new investment opportunity. Guaranteed returns, ground floor opportunity, with your capital and my business expertise. My pigeons made more money than your bitcoins. I interrupted, the words escaping before I could filter them. The kitchen fell silent. Mom looked at her hands. Dad stared out the window. Emily suddenly became very interested in her coffee mug. Kevin's smile tightened. "Look, we all make mistakes. But I'm talking about—" "I'm not giving you money, Kevin," I said quietly, "but I am buying the farm." Dad's head snapped up. "What?" I laid out my proposal. I'd pay off the mortgage in liens. I'd invest in repairs and new equipment. The farm would remain in a family name, but with a new purpose. Part working farm, part racing pigeon breeding and training center. "You can stay on, both of you," I told my parents. "Help run the place if you want. Or retire. Your choice." Dad's weathered face crumpled, a sight so unexpected I nearly looked away. "I was wrong about you, son. About everything. You found your own path, and I couldn't see its value." Mom was openly crying now. "We just want you home, Tommy. We've missed you so much." After the papers were signed and Kevin had skulked off, likely to sell NFTs of pigeons in Vegas, as I later joked to Emily, Dad took me to the old barn. In the corner, covered in years of dust, sat my grandfather's original pigeon racing trophies. "I saved them," Dad said simply. "Thought maybe someday." They became the first display in our visitor center when we opened Mitchell Family Racing Lofts 8 months later. The grand opening attracted racing enthusiasts from 6 states, plus a film crew from a documentary about rural American traditions. Emily opened her Vinyl and Beans Cafe and converted milk house, playing her disco records for visitors who could enjoy gourmet coffee while watching the birds train. She finished her master's degree online and taught English at the local high school between managing the cafe. We created a free program teaching local kids and veterans about racing pigeons. Many found healing in the simple act of caring for birds, watching them soar and return. One Vietnam vet told me it gave him hope to see something fly away and choose to come back. The first bird born on our new farm was a striking male with unusual markings, white wingtips that looked like they'd been dipped in paint. We named him Sam. He never achieved L's racing glory, but he sired dozens of champions. Sometimes the real victory is in what you help create. 2 years later, we expanded, opening a second location in Nebraska. By then, Mitchell Racing Lofts had become the most valuable pigeon bloodline in America. Breeders from Europe and Asia visited regularly, seeking to incorporate our birds into their programs. L's offspring, now returned from China through our arrangement with Mr. Zhang, formed the core of our breeding stock. Life has a funny way of coming full circle. On calm evenings, I still stand outside the lofts, watching our birds wheel against the sunset. Emily often joins me, her head on my shoulder, sometimes with our infant daughter in her arms. They told me I was nobody, that without education or family connections, my ceiling was predetermined. Just a farm kid with dirt under his fingernails and manure on his boots. But life isn't about where you start. It's about where you fly. Every bird I release into the sky is living proof that the so-called experts were wrong. Sometimes the most direct path isn't the shortest distance between 2 points, but the one that takes you high enough to see beyond the horizon. And sometimes, just sometimes, the wings of your soul need to break free before they can truly find their way home.